Greetings, this is Gemini Brett. I recorded a 2-hour version last night of Lesson 1, Part 4, The Wheel in the Sky. And I'm going to attempt to do this in just, well, about 30 minutes time right now. So this will serve for those of you that don't have time for the slow-paced and very redundant marathon I recorded last night. Or for those of you who prefer to learn at sprint speed, and also hopefully as a place to return to for review. I'm kind of considering it like a video PDF. When I'm able to work with an illustrator to create some still images for a PDF, a lot of the information that will find its way there is presented here today. All right. Greetings, Venus. You may have noticed, I didn't at first, that hidden here in this beautiful poster that Anna Zaharia created is our friend Hermes, Mercury, who tells us in his emerald tablets that he has the 3 parts of the philosophy of the whole world. Now, those 3 parts can be seen in many ways. We could say higher world and middle world and lower world, for example. But one way we see them show in the astrological glyphs, and Hermes is the only one that shows us all 3, is the circle of spirit, the cross of matter, and the crescent of soul. The rise, the reach, the rest in the root, the cross of matter. Inside the circle of spirit, the cross of matter inside the circle of spirit, this is the earth glyph. And I'll say what we're looking at here is the cross of matter inside the circle of matter. Why? Because it's all about earth. It's all about the primary motion, the spin of earth, which does bring us such hits as sunrise and sunset, but it's earth's secondary motion, the orbital motion, the zodiacal motion, which is the focus for us in lesson 2, that is about the sun, that is about spirit. So this cross of matter is something we're going to look at today. Where do we see it when we're out in the field? And what is this circle of matter, as I'm calling it now? And we'll start by engaging with the center of the wheel in the sky. And when we see time-lapse pictures or star trails pictures like this, I took this one in Sedona, concentric rings of stars around one common point. In the northern hemisphere, that common point is Polaris, the pole star, the star at which the northern pole of Earth, right, the axis of the primary motion, the spin motion, or as I like to say, the spine of Gaia, is directed. There's also a space that the South Pole is directed. There's no star there, right? But it's a place I call the South Pole space, and we'll find some principle here as we move around in the globe to locate these pole spaces, the center of the wheel, which will be places that help us find the chart in the sky. And so off we go. We will utilize Stellarium here. Now I have my default settings or my startup settings to show the cross of matter and the circle of spirit. Take the ground away and leave the horizon line in here. This is the cross of matter. Even just take everything away and we'll just look at that. Cross of matter. Okay, what does it consist of? On one level, the ground. And this is the ascendant and descendant that live there, right? So we'll look at the houses more next week as well. But first through 6th house, from the east to the west, underground. And on a quadrant house wheel like Placidus Porphyry, this direction, which is north, in the northern hemisphere, is where the 3rd house becomes the 4th. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, right? The meridian line, and specifically where the meridian finds the ecliptic, okay, the path or the circle of spirit, the path of sun. It is the place where the zodiacal constellations align, and where I would suggest the zodiacal signs project to, not from. But this place where the ecliptic, the sun's plane, the path of spirit intersect the north-south line, the meridian line, spine of Gaia, that is the quadrant midheaven. And it's so imperative for us to be able to see the chart in the sky. I'm going to go down to lower latitudes here. That'll do. We're about 30 degrees north latitude. In fact, I'm going to go exactly to 30 degrees north latitude. That'll bring the plane up a little bit. Why? All right, so as the wheel turns, we'll notice that the midheaven increases and decreases in altitude every day. Let's bring the sun in. This is solar noon, right? I'll take the ground away. When the sun is there, I see ascendant, midheaven, descendant, the roots, the rise, the reach, the rest, all in a clockwise motion. The sunwise motion is clockwise in the northern hemisphere, right? Always in the northern hemisphere above the Tropic of Cancer, or north of the Tropic of Cancer. This time when the sun finds its way to midheaven is middle of the day. Stellarium is getting away from us, folks. All right, let me slow this down a bit. So I'll just go by hours here. Roots, rise, and notice that the sun's not rising due east. We're going to look into that next week. Reach. This reach time, so important. Dim the lights and we'll dial the sun right into midheaven. And this is the height of the light. Now we're going to utilize that. What's one of our homework assignments? To create a meridian line. All right, somehow I'm on January 23rd, 2018. Great. So we can utilize astrology software, like I'll go to January 23rd. And for me to find the time of the height of the light, I simply have to move the chart wheel so that the midheaven, quadrant midheaven, I'm looking at a porphyry chart here. So Placidus, Porphyry, Regimontius, Campanus, there's so many house systems, but not equal, not whole sign. The quadrant midheaven, when that equals the degree of the sun, then this is the sun at the height of its climb. So somewhere around 1:32 p.m. Although I'm in Melbourne, Australia, my bad. So I'm gonna have to actually go somewhere on Earth that I can easily type into the chart where I'm going to San Diego. We'll relocate this to San Diego. And bring the sun up to the midheaven. Which is right around 12 noon at this time of year in San Diego. Yeah, it's right there. Okay, so January 23rd, 2018, 12 noon, I have the sun at the local midheaven in San Diego at the cusp where the 9th house becomes the 10th house on our astrology charts. We could find this also on websites like timeanddate.com, search for solar noon, type in the date, right? So here I'm going to go to 12 noon and just confirm that the astrology chart is correct. This is the sun at the midheaven, at the reach, okay? So this is the height of the light. Notice that it's not the highest point of the ecliptic, of the circle of spirit at this time. Why? We're going to look at that in the next lesson, and as we continue, we're going to find this to be a very important part to help us see the chart in the sky, to help us find the ascendant and descendant. We can actually find east by looking south, because east is not usually visible due to mountains and hills and trees and things. The 12th house, hidden things, okay? But the important thing to know about the reach is that it is where all stars culminate. So I'm going to rewind time. We'll get down to sunrise. I'll actually get back earlier, because what I want you to see is that Jupiter, as I move through time here, is going to reach Jupiter's height at the midheaven. Northern hemisphere, due south. So Jupiter culminating, Mars culminating. And here comes Saturn's culmination. So when Saturn culminates, it's halfway between Saturn rise, Saturn set. Mercury at the midheaven, halfway between sunrise and sunset. Sun at the midheaven. And then we'll see from there the sun descending, right? What goes up must come down. So from the reach towards the rest. And that means that when the sun is at the midheaven, it's the height of the light for the day, right? And we're going to utilize that time in the northern hemisphere, sun reaching in the south. So I'll turn my back to the light and look north and then draw that shadow on the ground. And now I have a meridian line, which is so imperative, because once I create that north-south line on the ground, at night I can go outside and I can look south, and let's say it's whatever, I'll just go to 9 p.m. and suddenly the midheaven's way up there. Well, I know where it is because I'm facing due south, because I created my meridian line, and I can see that Bellatrix is culminating at this time. That also Elnath, okay, which is about 27, a little less, 25 degrees in Gemini, in the tropical zodiac, right? So I can learn to see, let's go to 123 at 9 p.m. I said 25 degrees Gemini. Here we go, 22. So I just got within 3 degrees of the midheaven at this time by utilizing these techniques that I'm going to teach you. Okay? So that's kind of jumping ahead. That's all right. Back to noon. What if we didn't have astrology software or the internet? How could we find and make a meridian line? How was this done back in time where the sun itself was the clock? Well, the highest light for the day is the shortest shadow. When the sun's rising and it's down here, you cast a long shadow, yeah? And as the sun climbs to its height, the shadow gets shorter and shorter and shorter, and there's really fun practices in geometry. Maybe I'll share some videos on our links page of how we can work with this and just totally renature and do this. Okay, so here's the southern sky, the midheaven, yeah? Well, what about the northern sky? And this is northern hemisphere. So I want to look at this point. This is Polaris. This is where the spine of Gaia, the North Pole, is pointed, right? So as the Earth spins west to east, we notice the heavens spinning east to west, and they're all going to spin about that point. It's the center of the wagon wheel. Let me play through time here, and we'll watch that happening, right? So that is that point in the middle of the concentric circles and star trails or time-lapse shots. Polaris. So how can we find Polaris, or this center point in the northern hemisphere sky? One thing we can do is work with constellations. Or in this case, typically we'll work with an asterism. Right now I'm working with a stellarium delay, as if I'm communicating with Mars. Okay. So we'll bring in the constellation lines, and you might know this star pattern. I'm going to go a few hours before. Right? It's called an asterism, not a constellation, because it's part of a larger constellation. Asterisms can also be star groups that are formed with parts of many constellations. So they can be super constellations or like micro constellations, which is the case for the Big Dipper, the Chariot, the Wagon, the Drinking Gourd. It's had many different names. It is part of Ursa Major, the Big Bear. And the bears in the sky, Big Bear, Little Bear, for some reason they have these really long tails, which is not necessarily true of bears in nature, I believe. The arc of the Dipper, you can follow the arc to Arcturus, an old astronomy technique. And then we say you can spike to Spica, and that's a tale for later down the line. But we can follow these stars, the so-called pointer stars of the Dipper, Merak and Dubhe, to Polaris, as if they draw a line. And it's about 4 or 5 of these distances in the sky. So it's one way to find Polaris. Now, in some places, I'm going to rewind time here. Unlike Seattle, where I live, where Polaris is up here and the Big Dipper never sets, it's circumpolar we use to describe that, even though all stars are really circumpolar. They all go around poles. We can also utilize this constellation on the other side very easily. This is Cassiopeia, the queen on the throne. And she opens towards, not directly, but I see her pointing towards Polaris. We usually talk about Cassiopeia as a W. Well, here she's actually more like an M, right? And then later she's going to turn into more of like an E. And then what's she going to look like here? W. 3, right? Why? Because she's changing her orientation as she circles what? Pole star. Everything circles the pole star. Well, look at Big Dipper, okay? And touchy subject here, right? But this is an ancient symbol well before Nazis. The Dipper in this position, and this is a way where we can actually tell time during night, or we can tell seasons during the year. But if I draw a line like this, right, to Polaris, and then look about a quarter turn, what's that, 6 hours later? Okay. 6 hours later. 6 hours later. And this is an ancient symbol, the swastika, for getting centered, because it brings us to the North Star. Now, this is what I call the latitude principle. Okay. The altitude, where 0 is your horizon and 90 degrees is straight above you. The altitude to the North Star, the northern hemisphere, or to the South Pole space in the southern hemisphere, equals your latitude on Earth. I'm here in San Diego. The latitude is 32 degrees, 42 minutes, about 33 degrees. It's very hard to be totally accurate with this tool, but take my word for it, or play a bit, and you'll find that the altitude from the ground to the North Star equals the latitude on Earth. It's a very convenient thing to know. We can work with these pointer stars like Big Dipper or Cassiopeia to find North Star, which also is a relatively bright star, 2 degrees magnitude, not super bright. A common misconception with Polaris is that it's a very bright star. Now, it's one of the only bright stars in this local space. These 2 N stars of the Little Dipper, Purkab and Kochab, are very bright and visible too. But Polaris is nothing like, Capella or Arcturus or many other stars. Like Arcturus, magnitude 0.15, the lower, the brighter. Vega, 0 magnitude, very bright. And Polaris is about 2 degrees magnitude, and it's not a linear scale. We bring the ground back in, and we play through time, and we see that as the Earth spins west to east, what we notice is everything rising in the east, setting in the west. Am I going to see the moon if I'm looking north like this? No, right? See something more like that. I cannot see 3 directions at once with my face. We can do this with software. All right, so finding North Star is an amazing thing to do, because when we do partner work out in the field, in places where we haven't drawn a meridian line during the day, we can utilize North Star to find north-south line. You don't need a partner to do this, but it's very helpful to put somebody between you and North Star, and then turn them around facing you, and then have them turn you around, and now you're both facing due south. Everything in the southern sky, which unlike the circumpolar nature in the north, and I'm speaking north hemisphere here, right, features stars that will never set. In the southern sky, they do. They rise, they reach, and they rest. And we certainly don't see them root, right? What are they spinning around here? Well, also the pole. Let me stop this and let's play with the globe. In fact, I'm going to quit Stellarium for a second, give it a rest. The latitude principle. I talked about how the altitude to North Star equals the latitude where you're on Earth. I just pointed to North Star here, okay? I live in Seattle. It's about 48 degrees north latitude. 90 straight above, 0 is the horizon, 48 is above halfway. Salem, Oregon, exactly 45. There in San Diego, 33 degrees, a little bit more than a third to the top of the sky, right? 90. So 2/3 is 60 degrees, 1/3 is 30 degrees, okay? Well, what if you're at North Pole, which is 90 degrees latitude, right? Latitude principle, that means that North Star will be 90 degrees, zenith, directly above. And so at the North Pole, the whole sky is spinning like this, like the dome. What if you're at the equator? Latitude principle, the latitude of the equator is 0 degrees. So North Star is going to come down to the horizon, and the sky spins like this. In the North Star is on the horizon. In the South pole space is on the horizon, and the sky spins like this. We're going to go there. But I want to ask Papa Smurf just to help us see this on Earth, okay? So if he's at North Pole, latitude of 90, see how the pole star is going to be right above his face if he lays down on his back. If he's at the equator, do you see how it's going to be at his horizons? Okay. And halfway in between, the North Star climbs. So this is a wonderful thing to do. If you get on a plane and head to another latitude, before you go at home, find North Star, if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, or South Pole space in the Southern Hemisphere, and then check it out when you move around the globe, and you'll see the sky shift very quickly. When you move in latitude, but not longitude, right? The stars in Athens, Greece, around 38 degrees north latitude, are exactly as they are in San Francisco, around 38 degrees north latitude. So I like to say you could drop me out of a plane blindfolded, and especially if I'm in the Northern Hemisphere where I know the stars well and I have North Star to work with, I can tell you at least the latitude where I am on Earth by measuring the altitude to North Star, and that equals my latitude. Well, what if you're at 45 degrees south latitude? We'll go there next. North Star gets down to negative 45 degrees, so 45 degrees below the ground. Okay, but before we go down there, let's look at the circle of matter. Okay, the cross of matter is the north-south line, the meridian, Gaia's spine, and the horizontal line is the horizon. Okay, but the circle of matter is the celestial equator. And here's where we do some paper plate work. This is Earth's equator projected out towards the heavens. So this is a fun globe I picked up recently. You can see this dashed line, equator. So if I held this level and the camera was level, it's not moving up or down, right? Now the Earth is tilted. And so it does, and there's another curve that you see here that's called the ecliptic. And the ecliptic is not fixed on Earth. It's the only way we can draw it on a globe. And the intersection points would be the equinox points. Tale for another time, but we will look at all of these lines. For now, we're going to look at this one, the equator. Not only on Earth, but as it projects out into space, the celestial equator. Okay? Now, latitude, as Papa Smurf changes in latitude, so North Star or South Pole space will change in altitude. 90 degrees makes North Star at 90, which is zenith. 0 degrees makes North Star at 0, which is horizon. Can you see how it would be opposite for the celestial equator? If Papa Smurf's at the equator, celestial equator is directly ahead, and North Star is on the horizon. If Papa Smurf's at the North Pole, North Star is directly overhead, and the celestial equator is the horizon. If he's halfway in between, they're both 45 degrees in altitude, right? And in fact, notice that these are square, right? Could do something like this and create, one of those beautiful shapes of the pole, the spin axis, and the perpendicular plane, right? So I'm saying this is kind of the spine of Gaia, that vertical line of the meridian, and this is the circle of matter because it's Earth, all right? And the latitude principle, where you are in latitude, equals the altitude of North Star or South Pole space. The altitude to the celestial equator in your sky will be square, will be 90 degrees minus that. All right, so back into stellarium we go. And a cup of tea. I'm default set to Seattle, Washington. 48 degrees north latitude. In the 5th stellarium training video I put up, I show you how to add this angle measure tool, which is not default. There we go, latitude principle. It's hard to be super precise with this thing, but I think you get the point. Let me just show you configuration window. Plugins, angle measure, check load at startup. The next time you start stellarium, that will be there. You click it again to turn it off. All right. Let me look south again. So path of the sun, circle of spirit. This is the cross of matter inside the circle of spirit. And it certainly does not always look like the plus cross of the earth glyph. Approximates that twice a day. When the equinox points rise and set. The equinox points being the intersection of the circle of spirit, ecliptic, sun's path, and the circle of matter, celestial equator, Earth's spin plane, the paper plate. We'll look just at that one now. And notice that its altitude unlike that of the ecliptic, does not change, right? What is its altitude? 90 degrees minus this altitude to the North Star. Again, this is the sprint version, right? So information's coming quickly, but this would be a wonderful place, I think, to review. And I've actually dropped a couple of the mysteries that I didn't in the marathon version already. So about 48 degrees. What's 90 minus 48 degrees? 42 degrees. So this altitude in Seattle, Washington, from the horizon to the celestial equator, 42 degrees, okay? Well, what if I go 90 degrees from there? I'm gonna find, I didn't do such a great job of getting on the line, but I'm gonna find the South Pole space. And I'm really not, right? Because the ground is there, but it's a very principal thing to know. Yeah, so if Papa gets out here, Papa Smurf, Libra Smurf, he's always in warrior mode, it's great. But if he gives one of his scales to North Star, then his arms, if they're parallel, are going to emulate the spine of Gaia, the spin axis of the primary motion, the diurnal motion, the daily motion, the motion of matter, Earth, right? So he's pointing one arm in the north up towards North Star in Seattle, 48 degrees, and that means in the south sky, he's also going to be pointing 48 degrees below the ground, down here, which is a cool place to know, because if we can see that as the center of the wheel, and we can't, we can understand why in the south sky, with everything spinning around that, we notice planets rising and reaching and resting, right? Because they're spinning about this point that's below the ground. Whereas in the northern sky, everything's spinning about a point that's above the ground, and we certainly don't see all of these planets because we're not going to see east and west, right? We see only this wheel spinning. And in the northern sky, and for the northern hemisphere, it's spinning what? Counterclockwise, because everything spins east to west. So in the north, counterclockwise, and in the south, clockwise. So let's head down south. I'm going to go to Melbourne, Australia, which is 38 degrees south latitude. One way we'll say that is negative 38 degrees. Okay, so if I was going to look to North Star, which I'm certainly not going to see, North Star will be negative 38 degrees in altitude. Latitude principle. So it works also in the northern hemisphere, though I can't see it. Southern hemisphere. More importantly, if I look south, 38 degrees altitude, because 38 degrees latitude on Earth. So in the southern sky, I want to look 38 degrees up. And there's no star here. But this is the center point of the wheel in the sky. So you'll notice that everything's spinning around there, the latitude principle. So this is a powerful way. There's no North Star to find that pole in the sky in the southern hemisphere. There's no South Star, right? But we can use these two principles. We can, when the sun is at the midheaven, which in the southern hemisphere is due north, we can draw our shadow on the ground. Now we've created a meridian line. This is why this is so imperative. This is why connecting to the directions is so imperative. I'm In my world, I'm sure that this is the zodiac and that it is married to the directions. The tropical zodiac, at least for sure, is a result of the medicine wheel, the directions of Earth. Okay. So I can use a meridian line and then the latitude principle. Say I'm at 24 degrees south latitude, 24 degrees above the altitude, or the horizon, which is 0, zenith 90, right? Then I can find that space. Or I can just gaze for hours and hours and hours and attempt to approximate exactly where that is. Now, there are tricks of utilizing, just like we utilize the Big Dipper or Cassiopeia to help show us North Star. There's tricks of working with Southern Cross and other triangles in the southern sky to help find the South Pole space. And maybe one of our Southern Hemisphere students can tell us exactly how they do that. Here's Southern Cross, which is in the constellation of Centaurus, of the Centaur, right? This is our closest star, Alpha Centauri. Okay. So anyway, creating the meridian line and learning South Pole space is a really powerful thing to do, because when we go to the northern sky, we can find the midheaven. Now, we don't necessarily need to know the South Pole space to be able to do that, right? This is me attempting to exercise patience given stellarium hesitations. Okay. All we really need is a meridian line and an awareness of ecliptic, circle of spirit, not circle of matter, celestial equator, planets, where they are at the time, stars, like here's, can't pronounce that word. Here is Nunki, right? About 15 Capricorn, I believe. So we can do that to help us find the midheaven and then help us see the chart in the sky. And then we'll also work with the high point of the ecliptic at a given time, which you can see more clearly here, is not at all the midheaven. Common misconception about the midheaven, that's right above your head? No. That it's the highest point of the ecliptic in a given moment? No. It just happens to be like in this example where Hydor is culminating, or Venus culminated. And let's watch that southern hemisphere flow again. East to west, which means counterclockwise, right? Rising in the east, reaching in the north, resting in the west. At some point, we're going to go between the tropics and explore that. It's a whole new world that sometimes during the day, the sky works like northern hemisphere and at other times like the southern hemisphere. I want you to notice a couple things here. Let me stop time. The intersection point of the circle of spirit and the circle of matter. Well, this is where we begin the tropical zodiac. There's the Libra point, and here's the Aries point at the intersection of matter and spirit. Okay, when I get to the equator, shocking that I couldn't do this within half an hour. I'm going to look east at the equator and bring the ground back in so I can get it below our feet. Okay. And we'll take the planets away. We don't necessarily need them right now, or the constellations. But I'm going to play through time, and we're going to notice some interesting things. One is that spirit, the ecliptic plane, our principal subject next week in lesson 2, is not fixed on the horizon. It changes in declination. And declination is a distance north or south of the celestial equator. Okay? The celestial equator, always 0 east in declination. Exactly. Never changes. Spirit does. Iakos, the rudder, your shamanic direction. Tales for next week and beyond. There are 2 zodiacal points that rise due east in the tropical zodiac. They are the Libra point, you just saw that happening there, and the Aries point, 0 degrees in declination. We can learn these constellations, and there are constellations that rise due east. You saw the priestess. Let me slow it down a bit. Orion's belt rises like due east, especially the Mentaka belt star, the unicorn, Hydra, parts of Hydra, the priestess, who hosts the Libra equinox point in our day and age, and that changes. That's lesson 3, I believe, where we look at the so-called third motion of the earth, precession. Here comes the serpent bearer again, Ophiuchus, right? So it's really cool to start to learn stars like, let me stop time, like stars here that we see in Altair or Ophiuchus or the water bearer. Constellation that we'll read as Aquarius, but I will call water bearer because constellations and signs are very different things, right? So the last thing I want to speak about is this, and I spoke at length about this at the end of the marathon session: measurement of where stars are located in space. Okay, so if I wanted to describe for everywhere on Earth where Vega's located, okay, and let me get closer to the ecliptic plane. Antares, 10 degrees tropical Scorpio. Sorry, Sagittarius, tropical Sagittarius, the heart of the Scorpion. And we can see here in longitude, 250 degrees, 10 degrees tropical Scorpio, 180, 0 Libra, 210, 0 Scorpio, 240, 0 Sagittarius, 250, 10 degrees tropical Sagittarius. I keep saying Scorpio because the heart of the Scorpion, confusing because signs and constellations are different things, and I promise you we're going to get into that. And working with these directions in your meridian line, it's the profound way to anchor into this, okay? So that's why we start here. Now, in astrology, and this is how it used to be for the astronomers, the science fold, right? We would utilize longitude, which we call zodiacal degree. It's a measurement on the plane of the sun, the ecliptic plane, spirit, and latitude. Okay, like Antares is 4.5 degrees south of the ecliptic plane. If I go to my configuration window and information, I can add right ascension and declination. This is how the astronomers are measuring or telling you where to find a star in spherical coordinates these days. They used to do longitude and latitude, which are measured from the ecliptic plane, and I want to say spirit. But that mindset in these days, right, very materialistic, they're measuring from matter. Makes sense, right? So declination would be, in this case, Antares, angular distance from the celestial equator. And you can see that here, we're going to see that it's much more than from the ecliptic, right? The latitude of Antares from the ecliptic is 4.5 degrees south, and the declination is 26.5 degrees south. Okay, the other thing is right ascension. Let me go ahead in time just a little bit, because I've got to show the equinox points. Right, where, take the ground away, where the circle of spirit, sun, and the plane of matter, the circle of matter, celestial equator, paper plate, cross, we find the equinox points. And that's where we start, in so many senses, the tropical zodiac, even though tropicos means the solstice points. All right, we'll get back into that next week. But right ascension is measured from this place. If I bring in the ecliptic grid, that's going to get really confusing, and so does right ascension. I kind of cracked the code at the end of the marathon movie. You could just watch the last 5-10 minutes of that if you want to get deeper into this. I think the last thing I want to share before I hit stop is that longitude and latitude is a way to work with where a star is from respect of what? The ecliptic, which is, I'm calling the circle of spirit because sun lives there. Whereas declination, something that we'll utilize for sure, and right ascension, not so much, is the measurement, the description of where a star or planet is located from the plane of matter, the paper plate. All right, friends. Thanks for watching. See you in space.